Today down in the comments, I want to hear what your favorite independent, low-budget horror films are. I'm not talking about $1 or $2 million little indie gems. I'm talking DIY, borrow money from family and friends, labors of love horror movies that you think hold up with the big budget stuff. Hello, I'm Adam Caesar. This is Project Black T-Shirt, the channel where we take new or reissue horror movies and pair them with horror fiction that you will enjoy reading if you like those movies. Make sure to like this video and subscribe for more, and check out all the links and goodies I have down for you in the description, as always. Instagram, Twitter, links to buy the movies that we're talking about. Today we're looking at not one, not two, but 3 horror films. They are the complete Malevolence trilogy. Malevolence, the first one. Malevolence 2, Bereavement, which was also released as just Bereavement, I believe. And the newest installment, Malevolence 3, Killer. This was from 2018. Malevolence itself came out in 2004, and Malevolence 2, I think that was 2011, sometime in between here. All 3 of these films were written and directed by Stevan Mena. Mena also made Brutal Massacre, a comedy, if you remember that one. He's been making movies for a while, and these are his kind of most well-known films. They've recently been re-released, all 3 of them on Blu-ray. Before this, I had only seen the first movie. I'd only seen Malevolence. It was definitely released 2004. That was the glory days of Best Buy carrying movies. That was the glory days of DVD and physical media, and Anchor Bay was putting out a ton of reissue films, and then they were dabbling in releasing new films. And Malevolence was a movie that Anchor Bay had put out, and they'd even done a little bit of a theatrical push for it. I kind of remember it was a bigger deal. It was the DVD case was a little different, and it was like just kind of touting how extreme the movie was and how crazy the movie was. Like all the marketing hoopla was bent towards like, this is the scariest movie you'll see. And I remember at the time watching the movie, and the movie's fairly understated. It owes a huge debt, an enormous debt, a very big debt to the films of John Carpenter, especially Halloween. It is kind of a throwback slasher in the sense that it's not referential, but even at the time it came out in 2004. It takes place in 1999. There's a prologue sequence in 1989, and I just remember being like, well, this isn't the movie they're marketing. This isn't the super scary, super extreme film they're marketing. And I kind of, once Bereavement came out, and then once Killer came out, I just, for whatever reason, didn't check them out. I did enjoy Malevolence, but now with all the films on Blu-ray, I was like, you know what? Let me get these. Let me revisit Malevolence. Let me watch the sequels that I hadn't seen, and let's see what these movies are kind of all about. Let's place them in that context. So I went through them, 1, 2, 3, and I didn't watch any of the special features. I didn't do any of that until I was done with 3. I'm really glad I did, because Malevolence, we'll go through Malevolence first. It is, we have a quick prologue sequence of a girl in some kind of farmhouse or slaughterhouse somewhere being killed, and a child being forced to watch her be killed. And you're not quite sure of the relationship of the child to the adult that's doing the killing. Then we flash forward to our kind of hapless heroes, who are actually villains because they're robbing a bank. There's this guy and his girlfriend's talking him into robbing a bank because her brother just got out of jail. They go to rob a bank in Allentown, PA, and it goes wrong, and their hideout house that they're going to go to is where a serial killer is hanging out. And that's kind of it's Halloween plus a bank robbery film. And that's how the first movie plays out. The second movie, Bereavement, is actually a prequel to the first movie. We see the killer in the first movie is the little boy in the prologue from the first one, and we kind of see the trajectory of how he becomes the killer in the first movie. And Malevolence 3, now this is a big spoiler, so if you want to go in completely pure, maybe don't listen here. But Malevolence 3 takes place 1 day after the first Malevolence, with the killer still on the loose and kind of the fallout of that. These films were made nearly 20 years apart, and what struck me most about the whole series, especially Malevolence, was the strong regional horror flavor that the first film has. And the second film really doubles down on that. And then the third returns to Pennsylvania, returns to the Lehigh Valley where the first film takes place, and kind of has that same flavor to it. But The kind of magic of filmmaking is I had built this whole story about like, well, this has to be how these movies were made, because Steven Mena must be from this area of Pennsylvania. He must have kind of like made these movies as like a love letter to this kind of pastoral Americana. Like I said, I don't read these films as overly brutal. I don't read these films as overly traumatic, even though there is some horrible stuff happening in them, even though they are really kind of downbeat and dour in a lot of ways. They are slashers, but they're not really fun slashers. They're not trying for the Friday the 13th kids transgressing with drugs, sex, and alcohol and getting killed for it. They're very much in the like, let's build up these characters almost to their detriment, almost to an extreme amount, and then they're gonna get, you know, the killer's gonna come in and wipe them all out. So it had that feeling to me of regional horror filmmaking. And once I started digging into these special features, of which there is a lot, there's some kind of vintage behind the scenes stuff. For the first Malevolence, there's a little sales trailer that they made to try to get funding for the film. There's a lot of kind of fun stuff, fun visual stuff, but I think the real meat of the special features are the commentary tracks, because the behind the scenes and stuff like that is a lot of talking about the whys and wherefores of making the movie, very self-serious, almost like the films themselves, very much like lofty aspirations. This is what we're doing, and we're doing it on a budget, and here it is. But the commentary tracks are wonderful because they're very nuts and bolts. Here's how we made these movies. I did not realize that Steve Mena was a Long Island guy, Long Island boy, like myself. So I love Long Island horror. I love the idea of horror filmmakers or creatives from Long Island, like I am, even though I live in Philly now. So I was kind of fascinated with that, and then you listen through the commentary tracks and you look into the production of these films. The first one, that whole regional American pastoral feeling that I got from the movie, a good amount of those shots are on Long Island. They do go to Allentown. They do shoot all over the Lehigh Valley for stuff later in the film, but there is some stuff filmed on Long Island, which I just loved it. I love that it kind of burst that bubble, burst that illusion of me being like, oh, I went to film school, I can watch a movie and decode it. And I was completely wrong. So these are films that are incredibly ambitious, and 1 and 2, I think, can be held up really as examples of like, wow, like look at what independent filmmaking can achieve. 1 is shot on film, it has this great look to it. It clearly shows its seams in some aspects. 2 is beautifully constructed. It helps that the cast is more familiar. You have the beautiful Alexandra Daddario plays our main final girl here. She comes into town to rural Pennsylvania. Her parents have been killed in some unspecified accident. She comes to live with her uncle, Michael Bean, and his family. And wouldn't you know it, they live just across from the like terrible slaughterhouse where the one guy lives who's doing all the killing. But Michael Bean, Alexandra Daddario, you have a cast of familiar faces, even if Alexandra Daddario is retroactively a familiar face because this is kind of her first big role. The direction and the acting and everything about Bereavement feels much more assured. And then you get to Killer, which I don't really look at other reviews before I talk about reviews, but I remember when Killer came out, and I remember people not being as into it, not liking the film as much as the prior 2 films. And this is where I become the real annoying contrarian that I can be sometimes. Malevolence 3 Killer might be my favorite of the series. It is clearly the most ambitious. The cast, just the cast alone, is probably like 4 times as many actors in Killer. Aesthetically, feels like a much faster film, feels like a film made on much more of a budget. I really like the main girl, Katie Gibson. I think she's good in it. I like the construction of this is literally one day after the events of the first film, which means that a film shot in 2015 to 2018, or however they broke down the scheduling of this, has to be a period film, which is another kind of obstruction to throw at Mena and his crew. And quite sadly, if you look into the production of this film, there was and the commentary track, the movie had to be drastically reshot and rewritten because one of the lead actors sadly fell ill and didn't make it through. But it is in that respect, and in the fact that it's a much lighter movie than the other movies. Each one has their own kind of tonal shift to them. But the fact that Malevolence 3 is the lighter of the three, the fact that it does feel like the culmination of like 20 years of a filmmaker making these fairly threadbare but also very deliberate and very thoughtful, even if the thoughts get kind of broad. The fact that this is the culmination of that, and the fact that it had so many problems, and you can almost tell in the film, like if you think back after, well, I'm telling you now, but I didn't know any of that while I was watching the movie. I just was kind of like, I'm vibing with this. This is the movies generally are not that exploitation-y. They don't feel overly gratuitous either in sex or violence. But Malevolence 3 feels a little bit like it's kind of more of a wise guy in that respect. It's just great. I think when you put them all in a row and you watch 20 years of someone's life, of someone's creative life, in a matter of days, it really makes you appreciate how tough making a movie is, how tough making, a relatively quote-unquote simple slasher movie is, but you do that 3 times and you do it over 20 years and you do it with no money. I know these movies won't be for everybody, and I know someone down in the comments is going to be like, these sucked, but I think you're wrong, and I think if you've watched the channel long enough, if you know my taste a little bit, and we share tastes, these are they're like $12 on Amazon each one, and I think Mena is actually selling them on his own website as like a bundle for like $30. It's well worth the $30 just to check it out, just to be like, okay, well, if you're me, you watch a lot of movies from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. I don't watch a lot of films from the 2000s, and I definitely don't watch a lot of independent films from the 2000s. It just felt so refreshing, and it felt like such an interesting, even though these films are fairly recent, they still have a way of feeling like time capsules to that kind of era of, hey, if you made a movie and it was good enough, a DVD company would put it out. They would push it, and they would push it hard, and Walmart and Best Buy and all them would put it front and center. Man, I really enjoyed the time I spent with these 3 movies, and listening to the commentary tracks, which again are it's this weird mix of self-seriousness, of like these are serious psychological examinations of serial killers, which they are and they aren't, and the brass tacks of like, yeah, when we were shooting this, I was going crazy because, we were a small production and people kept coming up and asking me what we were doing while we were trying to make a movie. It's just that kind of stuff is gold, and these movies provide it in abundance. A great little set here, which I didn't even realize until I started filming this. The steer skull that figures prominently in the movie is kind of on the spine when you line them all up together. Yeah, fun movies. This week's book recommendation, because we're talking about independent cinema, and because watching these movies really put me in a kind of nostalgic place of remembering being a kid on Long Island and in middle school and high school, and going and getting VHS and DVDs of movies I probably shouldn't have been watching, and like learning about how movies were made. I kind of worshipped at the altar of Lloyd Kaufman and Troma. And his first book, All I Need to Know About Filmmaking, I Learned from the Toxic Avenger, which Kaufman actually co-wrote with James Gunn. It's got an introduction by Roger Corman. I just remember loving it. Gunn worked for Troma at the time. This is pre-Guardians of the Galaxy, clearly. It's been a long time since I read it. I don't know, 16, 17 years. But I just remember loving it. And I might even dig out my signed copy from storage and leaf through it and go enjoy it and bask in kind of those glory days. That's this week's book recommendation. I'm Adam Caesar. I am an author who writes novels, novellas, comic books when they let me, And if you want to find out more about me, more about those books, thank you so much for everyone who's picked them up. Thank you so much for everyone who's told their friends. Thank you for everyone who is looking forward to Clown in the Cornfield, August 2020, from Harper Teen, my first big book. Thank you so much, and you can sign up for my mailing list down below, send you a free sample, and we can be in touch through Twitter, Instagram, all that stuff. Thanks, and I'll see you next week when we're going to talk about something really, really exciting, but I don't know what it is yet.